Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha,
Steve?
I'm Chris.
I'm Jared.
and this is a series where we talk about sci fi stories in all their forms. Today, we are going to be wrapping up Embassytown. We're going to be talking about the last two or three parts of it. We stopped at part 6 last time. Today, we're going to be discussing the section on the languageless and parlay and relief. The short story for today is A Martian Odyssey. The name of the author escapes me at the moment. I should have had this open, but
Stanley G Weinbaum, or Weinbaum
yes,
maybe.
Stanley G Weinbaum.
White Bum. We'll just call him White Bum.
And so we've been working our way through the big book of science fiction. So the next short story we will be reading is The Last Poet and the Robots by A. Merritt. So with that, let's move into talking about Embassytown, the last bit where I guess the languageless, as the title predicted, started to play a big role in this section. I'm trying to remember what happens way at the beginning of the section, but an army is formed at some point, and similes become metaphors, and that plays a big role. And I think we were talking earlier before the recording started, Chris. You mentioned that you enjoyed it more than liked the book. I think I did like the book until the first 3 quarters. I think this was the section where it became no. I said all the wrong words. You were interested rather than liked. Yeah. So yeah, I think this bit was interesting rather than enjoyable. Everything up to here I enjoyed quite a bit, but this section was a little bit harder for me to get into.
Wow, I 100% agree with that. I especially, I think we started with New Kings, whatever that means. And then it was languageless. What are they called again? I forget. They had a nickname for them. For the languageless.
Absurd. The absurd.
Absurd, that's right, yeah. And which is fine. But the same thing happened to me with Perdido Street Station. I was really getting into it, and then it hit a section where he kind of I don't know how to explain it. I couldn't even explain it in my own review, but he hit a section where he starts telling you about certain events and certain themes related to the event that seem slightly disconnected to how he had presented the story thus far. And I'm still trying to figure out what exactly it is, because he did that to me in Perdido as well. And then he has an ending, and the ending is usually pretty good. It resolves, and it comes full circle to what they were talking about in the beginning of the book. But it's that section that between past halfway of the book and towards the end where something a little bit seems dissonant somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that. I watched your review. If anybody hasn't seen Jared's review, I think it's very good. I think he touches on a lot of the things that make this book really interesting in it. And I think it's been watching your review, funny enough, that I kind of went, the last section of it got away from what I think the book was about in a lot of ways. We often talk about how we pick these little sections almost at random, they end at a certain point. And often it actually kind of forms a section of opinion, I think, if you know what I mean. Because up to the end of last week, I was really interested in how they went about and explaining how the language worked, for instance, and how that related to being a simile and what a metaphor and why all those things really existed. And I thought, this is so clever. This is so well thought out. Regardless of whether you enjoy the book or otherwise, there's definite craft here. He's really done an expert job of that. And then we step into this fourth part, and it becomes a bit more like the theme of it is about war. And it's a war about identity and not about language, as it turns out, because the absurds can't do language anymore. So it's almost kind of does an about face on itself, the book, I think, in some ways, and kind of takes away from the stuff that made it really interesting and then played on a different theme. And it might be a case that for me, that isn't the book, or that isn't the direction that I wanted to go the book. And when you're reviewing books, etc., that's one of the things that I think is really hard to separate the fact that you're invested in the story, you get to a certain point, and what you hope is going to be explored in it isn't what happens. And therefore, you kind of criticize the book for that, even though it was probably never the author's intention to do that, if that makes sense. But for me, the themes that he built up and presented, he kind of got away from, and I actually think he got himself into a corner of, shit, I don't know how to end this, in a lot of ways. Now, he ends up satisfyingly ending it at the same stage, but I think to get there, he had to kind of do something else other than present language, and I think that's where I kind of fell on it.
Is that kind of what he does? Is that kind of his style, that he does that kind of thing for, or is it just the two? Has anybody else read other work by him?
I certainly haven't.
Not other than Perdido, no. That was the, but it. I did get the same feeling with Perdido Street Station, even though I think I like Perdido a little better just because it was more fantasy based.
Yeah.
And I liked some of the characters in Perdido a lot. And so I don't think the characters in this book were quite as strong as far as, likability, and that's something. If the characters aren't likable, that should be fine. I mean, that's just the world they're in. But I mean, I like the narrator quite a. She's a good first person character, but like I was saying, sometimes it seemed that she was a bit too understanding of her antagonist and a bit too forgiving of her antagonist for a first-person narration. I could definitely see it, that kind of, like I was, unless she was picturing this as an older woman, like in looking back 50 years or something like that, or whatever the case may be, but we didn't get any kind of hint of that. We don't know when the story is being told on the page here, and so I was just like, I would have liked to have seen a little more, these frickin' jerks did this, like, and I'm mad at them, instead of, I get it, I understand their point of view. This is what their point of view was, and I get it, and that's kind of how it went. And I would have liked to have seen a little more, maybe a little more anger from for what happened here.
I think that makes sense. I did feel, and it felt especially apparent towards the fourth section, that I felt a certain distance from the main character. In a lot of ways, this distance felt similar to how I felt about the biologist in Annihilation. But see, that felt intentional. Like, we had to keep this distance from her, and she wasn't very likable. And in a lot of ways, I feel similarly about this character, but I can't say that I think that this doesn't necessarily feel intentional. And that I think we're meant to like Avicii and sympathize with her, but I don't know, maybe it's because of how quickly events moved and she didn't really talk too much about how she was feeling at any point. It was more describing external events. So even though it was a first person narrative, we didn't see too much of her in the story, if that makes sense. There's no internal aspect, like we don't explore any of her own state of mind. And so I think that served to maintain a distance for me throughout the book with her, and I think that maybe made it feel a bit off, because she's playing this key role and like almost a chosen one trope, if we want to look at it that way. But then, like, we haven't really built up to her to the reasons why she's the one who needs to do the saving, why she's the simile. Like, you could argue that she's the one telling the story in retrospect because she was the one who happened to be there to save them all, and that's great. And she's just like sort of narrating without making herself seem too important. So yeah, I can justify it, but
Yeah.
overall it did reduce my enjoyment to a significant extent, just in this last section. And to your point, Chris, yeah, I think also a battle with a full-fledged army, I didn't see that going there at all. And once again, it felt off. Like, not, it wasn't bad or wrong or anything. It just not somewhere. If I had to guess 100 things, I wouldn't have guessed that. And so yeah, again, like, because I wasn't prepared for it, I think it didn't seem too great. But apart from that, I think there were some things that I really appreciated, in that there were several threads that were open at various points that I think he did a fantastic job of bringing all together. Like, the whole thing with the Immer, I think we already solved that because they are on the edge, and that's why they need to go off into exploring the rest of the world. They ended with that. The thing
Yeah.
with the husband, I think that came back around. The thing with the lying, I think, which was the biggest question mark for me last week. Why did we spend those 100 pages setting up this whole thing about the Festival of Lies? And especially since, she was trying to make sense of it at one point, saying, I don't know, I'm trying to impose a narrative on it, but maybe it didn't happen in any order that I'm trying to understand. So all of that, I think, bringing it together, even the automaton, although I was slightly dissatisfied with how things ended with her, I just think, in terms of putting a nice little bow on everything that he had started up, I think he did a really good job there, at least.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the character arcs came to fruition, um, at the end. So in that sense, it was a very well-crafted standalone novel. So because you really got a lot of answers, but he left certain things open that were good with being left open, like what the future's going to bring and all that stuff. But yeah, and like, I can't fault the crafting of the book as far as the characters and how their arcs went, and where they ended up, and um all that's. But like you were saying, the interest dropped off once there wasn't, because we got the really neat stuff at the beginning, and the interest dropped off when there was no more neat stuff, and there was the battles between the factions and stuff like that kind of played out not as original as the beginning of the book.
I think there's two key things that kind of I get drawn to in the story. One is the main character, like we've talked about. She's very middle of the road the whole way through. Like, she doesn't veer up or down. She doesn't side on any side. But she also doesn't have a very satisfying character arc. It's almost like she's there from the first 3/4 of the book as a sideline character. There's no real reason for her to be really invited to a lot of the things that she witnesses and sees, other than the hosts want her to be there, which, in retrospect, isn't totally like it. Yes, no. Like, I don't really see why she was important at the start. So she doesn't really have that full character arc. I think the whole idea of the immerser and the immer was sort of put in the story to give her some importance, if you know what I mean, throughout the first part of the story. But because we didn't investigate that really in any way, it sort of was like, and what? So why is she at all these big events and all the rest of it now? She obviously has a big role to play at the end, but even within that, she is sort of like just.
She's a bit passive.
She's passive, but she only really
Yeah.
teaches them how to lie better. I mean, that's really what her role is, and I actually think the second part of that then is the other bit that I don't really love is the fact that, okay, she taught them to lie, but then they just walked in amongst each other, and they were all able to just absorb this new language and this new land just by existing beside each other. Like, I didn't feel that made complete sense, and that could be just being stupid and not really understanding, but it just kind of seemed a bit convenient that they were baying for blood one minute, they were going to tear everybody down, and the next minute one of them went in. The Spanish dancer goes in, does his little dance, and kind of tells a bit of a lie, and they all kind of go, "Oh God, that guy's great! Let's all realize what we're doing." And it's like, it just seemed a bit quick and convenient, rather than kind of saying like the seeds were planted and it ruminated for another 20 years and all of that kind of stuff. Like, you had the
Spanish dancer said "Kumbaya," and everybody
pretty
got
much
along, right?
You know, he basically wore a new style of fashion, and everybody went in and went, "He looks really cool." Listen to what he's saying. He's got it all figured out. We know nothing. Yeah, those are the two things that just I didn't feel satisfying. For as brilliant as the setup and the world building was, and how like you pointed it out, like, this book's 400 pages long, and he manages to build the world, set up a really interesting language system, have us figure it out along the way, give really good examples of how it all worked, and then sort of made it a bloodbath at the end of their war. And there was interesting stuff that happened in it, because we speculated that a sort of hierarchy would kind of be set up within it, and certainly within the absurd that did start to happen, etc. So we did see some of the stuff coming,
Right.
but it just, like, I can't remember the last time I got to the end of a book that I didn't hate, because, like I say, I quite enjoyed it, but that I wasn't desperate to get the end of it. You know, you get that last 50 pages feeling, and you go, keep going, keep. I was sort of like, I didn't get that from this book. Yeah, so which is a weird feeling, because just even poor books that I've read, I sometimes get to the end and go, well, actually, there's something about the end here. This is ramping up quite nice. There's tension, and in this one, I was kind of like, but if everybody died, would that be so bad? You know, like Seal died. Like the guy, Luke Skywalker walks in from the outside and pulls out his gun, and I thought that bit was a bit silly, but yeah.
Did you just say everyone should have died?
I'm saying, would you have cared? Is really what I'm saying. Like, if it hadn't worked out, would it have mattered? I'm not sure.
I just thought it was funny. I thought I might be rubbing off on you or something.
That may be exactly what's happening, Steve. You know? That's exactly it. There wasn't enough death. There was only a bit of light mutilation and a couple of suicides, but in my books, I need more.
Sounds like a walk in the park to me. Yeah.
Sounds like a Sunday.
Yeah. I think there were so many interesting things like set up about the world in the beginning that I didn't quite realize that I wasn't necessarily liking the main character. I didn't dislike her at any point, but yeah, she wasn't interesting enough. She was fine, I don't think. Yeah. So the war happened. I think the other thing is, like, I've had difficulty wrapping my head around the logic of it all, if that makes sense. Like, how did it, I'm finding it in the book sort of gets around this by just calling their language impossible. That how do they do any thinking without language, right? They don't have abstract thought, apparently. But at that point, are they different from, say, parrots? Is that a comparison the book made at all? So that's the other reason I feel like I wasn't able to appreciate the last of the book, because it relies so heavily on how language has changed. And I can't say that it makes sense. Like, I'm sort of taking her word for it that this was significant. And so, like, things changed over this. But I'm not able to take I'm having difficulty with the abstractness of that. Like, what did really change? They changed the consciousness of a whole race, of a whole species. And that's significant. It's almost like, I don't know, bringing a race to sentience, for instance. Like, let's say that's the level of change that they may have wrought. But how that happened, I think I have to black box it and just understand it at an abstract level rather than like appreciate the logic of it all, which I would like to do, but I had difficulty with in this. And yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It's a yeah, you got me thinking there because you wonder the level of consciousness thing, and how they can go from a non-language speaking species to a language species. I mean, there seemed to be, how many years was it when they just had regular ambassadors
Mm.
in this place? And how many years was that exposure to regular ambassadors a part of the long-term cultivation, if you will, of a species to be able to have a consciousness beyond abstract, thought, or non-abstract thought, whatever the case was with this species. And is it just exposure we're talking about that triggered this basically evolutionary event? Going from adaptation to actual evolutionary adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all it was? And if that was the case, I think you're right. I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more of that explained, as that being the case, rather than she suddenly saves the day by teaching one of them how to lie better.
Mm.
There also is a bit of a problem in how it's set up because we are told that their language is different, and actually what we're reading is a translation of their language, right? But for her solution to work, it would have to work exactly like our language insofar as it contracts part of sentences in that order. And because they dual speak, and I don't see how that works.
Mm.
Or I don't see how it satisfactorily works is probably a better way to put it, because it relies on them having the same language design that we have, that reading left to right, that kind of like even structure of verbs,
Yeah.
Verb, noun, etc., which seems unlikely for how their language system's set up. So again, I just think the first point, and pretty much everybody's point at this stage, it just felt unsatisfactory and didn't make as much logical sense as it probably could and should have for how clever the rest of the book is.
Mm.
Yeah, and granted, we're digging deep in the weeds.
Oh yeah,
here.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
We could just pass it off as alien weirdness and move on. But
Yeah.
but yeah, no,
that is true.
It's good points. Good points.
Mm-hmm.
I think when a book sets up so much in the beginning, and it doesn't feel like it's really smoothed over in the second half or the end, it's kind of unfulfilling. It kind of feels like all this setup, and what did it all mean?
Yeah, I think in the thought experiment aspect of it, that's what I would have liked to see wrapped up. And it was, except with a lot of action thrown in, which I think I've come to realize bothers me in if that's your primary source of resolution. And yeah, I think I can see why that needs to be done to make the book more readable or interesting, but I would have been happy with just the conclusion of the thought experiment. Maybe even, I feel like we say this a lot about some of the stories we read, but as a short story, I think this would have worked immensely. But in the longer form, I think where it went, I'm not too pleased with it. So the other thing, I think you pointed this out, Chris, was how quickly it all happened. Right? She struggles for days, but when the insight comes, it comes rapidly.
Mhm.
And I can buy that to a certain extent, but I'm having trouble agreeing that it would be like that. Like I can, what Jared said, we can call it alien physiology, that she just broke it the right way, that everything suddenly started making sense. But I don't see that. I feel like it should take months or years, but there are justifications at each point. Like she says, he's still reeling from it, but I'm asking him to do more. I'm giving him more responsibilities and so on and so forth. But despite all of that, that feels like too little to justify too big a deviation.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Uh, uh, he does. He does mention that there was like as things would go because they were hunkered up for a while in some place, right? Avoiding both Ezra's faction and the hybrid, not the hybrids, the absurd, um, and there was also some other factions in play, if I'm not mistaken. And she did mention that there's this new tribalism going on that was a new like a whole new socio-political spectrum within the whole Embassytown uh metro area here. And so in that, I'm not sure of the time that all that took place, but that new type of tribalism would be, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Would enhance change, basically. It would speed it up. It would make change a quicker thing. And so I'm just trying to put my thoughts together and try to see why it progressed the way it did and why he presented the story, because it seems like he's like the type of writer that seems to do everything on purpose. And so I'm just trying to put it together myself and see, okay, maybe he did it that way because of that, and he's trying to say that kind of tribalism will speed up a conflagration that would make a violent conflict inevitable in order to bring about change that they were looking for. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe the main theme of the book, it felt to me from the beginning that it was language and identity, perhaps to a certain extent. But I think what you said, Jared, ultimately what happened was that the centralized power held by the staff and the ambassadors was sort of overthrown, and I guess it got more distributed in that everybody can talk to the host now, and it's not a few people controlling what happens to everybody in the city. So maybe we were misreading the central theme of the story, and this is it, the decentralization of power somehow, and not the themes of language. I guess they're both there, but yeah, this is probably what he wanted to talk about, but it didn't happen till the very end necessarily. There were hints throughout, but it was really drawn into focus in this last quarter. So maybe that shift felt a bit jarring.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could equate it to the Cultural Revolution of the 60s in the United States that had a huge change on how on a lot of laws in the country at the time, and it had a huge change on a lot of traditional societal views, and so maybe you could equate it to that, and maybe he left it open enough to also eventually see the pushback to that as well. So, well, maybe I'm just throwing stuff against the wall there to see what Mr. Mievill was thinking about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there was some interesting political stuff because it wasn't just the hosts that fell apart and fractured. Obviously, the humans did as well between the ambassadors and the different groups, even within the ambassadors themselves. And they're all like everybody's trying to do their own version of a power play in some little way, without really considering, God, we should have multiple angles of attack. Like the fact that Avis felt and Bren felt they had to keep this separate to themselves kind of felt like, no, it feels like you could have just said, well, we're going to try this, you keep on doing that, we'll be covered either way, without it doing. But it meant that there was a lot of characters that really weren't explained then. Like, I know it's Ilsib, but I could not call her Sybil, as it was that one. Again, seems like a sort of unnecessary character, other than, like, she was... It seems maybe a bit obvious to say, but she was shown as being a rebel because she didn't call herself Sybil and called herself Ilsib, like the wrong way round compared to like every other ambassador in some ways. And then the other character that we never seen anything or heard anything of really until the very end was Ursula, the android character as well, the robot character, which felt really highly underutilized. It felt like that was where we were going to get a lot of the interesting stuff was going to come from the story, is why they had removed themselves from society. And again, it could be like, I don't get it. I mean, it's very possible. This is Mr. Mievill is obviously a highly intelligent man, and actually I'd be surprised if he hadn't got answers for all of this in some ways. But to that end, I don't think it was really communicated to us in a way that it felt satisfactory, by the end of the story.
I think, Ilse, the purpose she served, I guess, was to help Avicii communicate with the host towards the end. And it needed to be an ambassador who's not in on the main thing, so we have a rebel ambassador. Like, yeah, I guess we can see the sort of purpose that she was created for, but maybe there isn't that much of an explanation for what was causing the dissenting elements in the first place. But on the other hand, the other way we could look at it is the society looks perfect, but it has so many cracks. Look at all these cracks, people running away from here, forming their own like side groups and so on. So yeah, I think if we think about it, it will probably all be there. But again, it's not necessarily clear or obvious.
That might have been part of Mieville's point, is that revolutions like this are never clear or obvious of how they happen or why they happen, and or just the way they do happen. And that might be part of what he's trying to say here.
Yeah. Very possible.
Yeah, I guess the overnight, like, it builds up over time and you don't necessarily see it because everything still looks largely okay, but when it falls, maybe it topples.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. What did you guys think? What did you make about what did you make of that final interaction with the automaton when she refused to acknowledge that the host could understand her? What do you think that was about? I feel like there's a point being made there and I completely missed it.
Chris?
I don't know. Like a lot of the book, I think it sort of fell apart. Like even the bits where they were trying to exert influence and they basically were ignoring them at that stage, the ambassadors. And otherwise they were just kind of like, that you're relevant to us in some ways. You're only there for the people that need you at that stage. The couple of, I can't remember what you call the two characters, but the two people that couldn't be convinced in some ways. So there was, like, again, this multi-layered bit of society. But yeah, like we were saying, a lot of the end of this book feels like I didn't get it. I didn't get it, and it's nice to know that I wasn't the only one then, because, like you say, I think it's highly unlikely that there wasn't a very particular reason for it. it definitely seems with how designed and how kind of well thought out and world built this is, that was the intention. But
Yeah.
try
In
and get it.
the only explanation that I could come up with is she's being like, we're seeing her as a parallel to Sile somehow, that in that they both do not want to acknowledge the change in the Arikai now. But then, like, what are we saying about the automaton? That is she different in her own way, or that her mind won't accept the change? Yeah, that still doesn't make sense to me. So
Well,
I
is
don't.
she being is she that robot basically? Is she being equated to the host that just didn't get the language at all? Because there was a couple of they had names, Dab and something else or whatever,
Yeah.
and they just didn't get it. They could not get it no matter what, and they ended up just kind of following along, or even I think they were put in front of some attack or something. I don't know, but and I was just wondering if the robot just doesn't get the fact that these things have evolved.
Oh,
She
I
can't
like
equate it.
that.
She can't compute it, and so maybe she's ignoring it because it's not something that's going to compute because it was too fast of a revolution. It was too fast of a evolution.
I like that, because the other way you could also think about it is Mievill sort of giving us a hook into trying to understand what the change was in the Arikai, that those who spoke language are like her, and those who evolved are maybe like closer to human consciousness. I don't know.
Maybe.
They are similes and metaphors now, because you just used the word like there. She's the
You
girl
did,
who,
yeah.
or the girl like. That was the
Yes.
contraction that was ended up being put together.
Yeah, I like that. I like that explanation will serve. What did you guys make of the husband shooting at Cal?
Cal, yeah.
Is Cal, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a little religious zealotry going on there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of in keeping with him as a character, but also not, because, as they point out, a bit dumb.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
But
maybe it's his final stand. That's...
Yeah. I didn't have a problem with that. I thought it was a decent ending for his character.
Yeah.
Because I have a feeling, and I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling that if you go back to the beginning of the book, you're going to see little clues about, if you pay attention to his dialogue. I have an odd feeling that you would see little hints that he was going to be heading in that kind of a off the deep end direction.
Yeah. I think his character and the whole religious cult, or the people who do not want the Arikai to change, I think that whole thing was pretty profound, right? How societies interact, and how much, say, one society gets over how much another changes. And also the fact that the Arikai have changed now, but because of the presence of another one, I think all of that, how that wove together, I think that was done really, really well.
Yeah. I like the little commentaries on how he, like, what was his name?
Skyle.
Skyle.
Yeah, I like Skyle too.
How he kind of was his personality type was the type that would latch on to something like a religion and go fanatical full front into it, and I thought that was well played out on that character's part. Yeah.
The other thing that I really liked was also the finding of the little bug enhancement, or that they found in Ra, wasn't it, when they exhumed him?
Oh right, yeah,
and how that then became the mode for creating these new things. The only thing about that sort of again doesn't line up that much is that Bremen sort of designed all that, right? And then they just give it all up. It was like, oh, we don't care about this anymore. And I was like, "Right, but you literally infiltrated and ruined and designed a very well thought out plan or whatever to kind of really be dastardly about it. It went wrong, obviously. Maybe you're just trying to wash your hands of it at that point, but it's like, we don't care anymore. It's like, right, okay. And they did sort of get their, well, it is talked about at the end of the book that they expect them to come and make another basically attempt at it in another lot of years and take another run on it, maybe another way. But it was also kind of that Wyatt character and everything that happened done with him, especially when he's basically saying, I know exactly what's going on. And they locked him up, and they were trying anything to save the colony, but they didn't speak to him until the very end. A lot of it seemed very convenient in terms of plotting and narration, rather than actually what would happen.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. As written or as narrated, it feels convenient, maybe even a little too optimistic. But I do think also that some things that you might object to, like that went on too fast, that happened too quickly, or this feels too convenient. There are tiny justifications for each of them that I mean I don't necessarily buy, but I'm like, yeah, it feels somewhat satisfactory. I can be happy with this. So yeah. What did you think of the fact that that was an interesting way to escalate the conflict, right? That Escal can now control what the Arikai do, not just intoxicate them, but also control them.
Yeah. How much was he controlling them? Were they controlling them? Was it an actual? Was he giving commands and they were just following?
Yeah, I think they
and he was
couldn't.
also he was doing it through a proxy as well, because he was using one of the, God, I can't remember again what his name was, his double barrel name was, but they basically used some of the hosts and given them power, and then kind of was doing it through them. So I think at the end, isn't it said that they basically were worried about their role because they basically betrayed their people at that stage? They betrayed the hosts as a thing for the sake of having a place or connection with the ambassadors closely. So they actually thought they were going to be the fallout of it, rather than necessarily what the ambassadors were doing. They sort of orchestrated that because they wanted that control and wanted to kind of create that system where they'd be needed.
Yeah, but it was still the addictive power of language that was still the means of control.
Yep.
And it was interesting that like you said, they had the bug in Ra died, right? Ra's the one that yeah. And so they were able to save that and put it in Cal, right? And that was the means by which. It's interesting because it's like we we can manufacture the fentanyl and give it to the addicts and have a means of control in that manner. That's it seems like there's definitely some kind of societal statement there on his part that he was like, I'm gonna have you guys think about this too. And he throws a whole bunch in this book that he's making us think about. But yeah, and it was you guys are right about the points of convenience as far as wrapping the story up. But what's the other option? Is it would have went on even longer, and would that have been better for the sake of the story? I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I never got the sense that, and maybe again it was because of the distance of the narrator from the rest of it all, but I never got the sense that the ambassadors were power hungry. So knowing that, Escal knowing that they can control the Arikai, that they were willing to go to that full extent and gain full control, that felt strange to me. I felt like we didn't know enough about either character to appreciate that. When it was Ezra, they were basically bullied into like continue to go intoxicate them because we need to do that to keep the city safe. But Escal was using it to, I don't know, implement some agenda apparently. But what about them made them like that? Why do they like having that power? Or is it just that they had the power so they used it, and that's it? That's the statement, that if you're given the power to do something horrible, you just might, uh, without any rhyme or reason.
I think it was sort of explained that they had been raised their entire life, like basically grown as ambassadors to be people that were important in that society.
Hmm.
And if they run the risk of being silent completely from society if the ambassadors were no longer needed to communicate with the hosts. Like at that point, they would become nobodies, and all the sacrifice and all the genetic experiments, etc., that were done on them were for nothing then. And so I think that's why Avis and Bren and Ilsib, etc., were not going to involve them, because they feared that the ambassadors wouldn't be happy with the plan that was also going to have them as just pawns to be played with, which is exactly what happens at the end. They are basically only being kept around and only being used to satisfy the ones who they couldn't convert or they couldn't speak to in that way, which in its own way was going to have to be enough for Ezcal or whatever version that was going to come later. Because I think that's what way it was explained. Could be wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Was Cal the one that didn't want to be sleeping with her?
Yeah.
Or was it
He
Vin?
didn't like Avis. That was
He didn't like her.
Yeah.
So Vin was, yeah. So we did see early on that he was kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And
there was also that talk that actually Ezra only really worked because the two of them didn't like each other either, and that they would have to find Ezcal would have to find something similar to be kind of at opposition with each other in some ways to make it work. So kind of Cal's self-loathing over the death of Ben, and Ez is over Raz as well. It's going to be the source of some of that.
Ooh, I like that because I like that little detail because that they hate each other, and there lies the contradiction in their consciousness that the Arikai are getting intoxicated on, and lies and paradoxes are things that they get intoxicated on. So,
Indeed.
Oh, that's nice. I like that little
Yeah.
connecting details. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there's so much clever about it, and while I'm like not totally in love with this book, it definitely has me intrigued to read more of his writing, because it's a phenomenally creative and clever world builder, if nothing else, and science fiction writer in that way. Like, I think the premises of his book will almost always be interesting. I'd be surprised if there wasn't that at the heart of it. And whether the execution, it's just like any other writer, artist, sometimes it'll pay off and sometimes it'll not be as satisfying, but the endeavor in doing and trying to create new worlds all the time is something you'll always keep going back for.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the fact that he I think he writes, what is political writer the right term for him, that he does put a lot of his, I guess, political opinions in his book. So it's also fun to figure out what he's trying to say beyond just the intriguing world aspect of it. So the cleverness mixed with, there's definitely something going on here underneath it all. I think that would make for very interesting reading for sure. I did enjoy Perdido Street Station quite a lot, and that was also very inventive and interesting.
Yeah, and the world building was incredible in that too. So
yeah. I loved how he described the city in that. So that the vastness of the city kept coming up and how it changed. But in this book, it's a more centralized and local aspect of the world, which I think also was done pretty well. Cool. Any other things to discuss about the book before we move on to talking about how we're all Wrens? Ouch.
No, Embassytown is done.
It's done.
Interesting. Definitely glad that I read it because it definitely did give plenty of food and thought, and it was
Yeah.
clever.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Like I said before, I think it's one of those things that's gonna sit with you for a while and sink in after a while.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's not a book that I would reread anytime soon, but I did love how clever it was, how interesting the world was. The Immer is something that I will take with me for a long time. I loved that part of the world. And yeah. Are there any characters you guys liked in particular? Or anything interesting? Yeah. I don't know. There was maybe Bren, I think. I
Bran's the
latched
only
onto a
likable
little bit.
character
Yeah.
in the entire book. Like even Avis is kind of like another character.
Yeah.
It's definitely is. To borrow a phrase from a podcast I listened to, it's a book of bell ends. Like from start to finish, like they are all very flawed individuals within it, all searching for power or all searching for some sort of importance in society, and maybe that's kind of the political point that he's maybe trying to make. You know, that people will do anything to feel important in society or feel like they carry some weight or meaning, even if it's just to be the butt of somebody's joke, or maybe that's meme culture. Like the whole thing, people are dying to be remembered. Like it could be seen that a lot of those similar metaphors, etc., are exactly the internet's age version of all of that little bit of fame that everybody's looking for.
Yeah, I like that.
Spanish Dancer was the best.
Spanish
Oh,
Dancer's
yes.
a great name.
How could
Great
I
name.
forget? Spanish Dancer was brilliant. Yeah. All right. So with that, we move on to if you're not sticking around for the short story, we will be starting Children of Time next week. We will be reading up to chapter 2.5 to the end of chapter 2.5 for next week, along with the short story that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. So with that, we'll talk about A Martian Odyssey by Stephen Weinbaum. Stanley Weinbaum. I'm so sorry. Stanley Weinbaum.
We are friends. Ouch.
So
3 1 1 2 2 2 4.
It was great. I liked it.
How interesting was this story to read? As like I thought this was an excellent study in the contrast of stories we've read, like the one we just finished, Embassytown, and Arrival, so the story of your life, where we have our first contact people painstakingly trying to communicate with an alien race, and these these guys, meanwhile, just with 112, 224, are able to communicate all the things.
Yeah. It was funny because this guy's sitting there trying to explain how he's trying to understand these aliens, and it's just like, oh, we just went through that in a, quite more serious tone in the other book. This was more amusing, but it was I was like, oh, that's fun. It's amusing and fun, and it was quite relieving after because Embassytown's a little heavy, and so that this was amusing, and so I had fun with
it. Steve and Chris are staring thoughtfully into the distance.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, you go first.
So I thought it was okay. I didn't think I did. It's nice. I think the biggest takeaway is looking at the story and the time period it was written. I think that's kind of the takeaway from a lot of these. How far? I think a lot of the things a lot of the language and a lot of the terms that are used, I think in science fiction now, I think they tried to change terms and kind of they tried to change people in the way that people think generally. They try to kind of put it in a futuristic sense. They try to evolve things that the way that they think language would evolve or thought processes or whatever. These stories are more like the all nuts and it felt very of the time the way that they talked, and it's supposed to be a story in the future. It was okay. I like we mentioned, the Tweel communicates pretty quickly. They draw on the sand and they understand how many planets. I thought that was kind of neat. I thought the dream monster was okay, but they didn't really explore it a whole lot. So I didn't really. At the end, I thought there was more story, and that was it. So yeah, not a whole lot of takeaway for me really. It was fine, I guess.
Yeah, it was published in 1934 in Wonder Stories magazine. So that's what we're up to now, is 1934. And the author was only 33 years old when he died. So he was a young man when he wrote this.
Totally agree with Steve. Not an awful lot to hang or think about other than, God, humans have an awful lot of high opinion of themselves, because he kept on talking about Trill basically not being that intelligent and being not as intelligent as them, except he couldn't make a thing out about his language and kept making these really weird interpretations of his 1122224 stuff, all that kind of stuff, and even his flying and letting his beak hit the ground in exactly the right spot, and but him also thinking, oh, we are so smart, and he's basically a thief at the end. You know, he basically caused a war by stealing something off of the other people, like it was not. I don't know, but but one of the things that did make me think is, has anybody here read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir?
No.
Yes.
Right. So if you ever read Project Hail Mary, think of this story, because I think there are very strong parallels about sections of Project Hail Mary and this story. It definitely, I can see a through line in how they approach some of the character work, etc. that's in there. I'll say no more about that, but I think if you enjoyed and have read Project Hail Mary and thinking, should I read this story, I think you'll get something out of it, because you'll see parallels there for sure.
Yeah, I think I forget which part of the story reminded me of it, but I do remember thinking of Project Hail Mary with this one. Pretty sure, but yeah. I thought the creatures were all pretty imaginative, especially the one that was building the pyramids. But overall, I found it difficult to jive with the story, and I think the problem was the extreme non-serious tone with which he told the story, the complete lack of awe. They're the first people on Mars, and there's no awe or surprise or anything to that effect of these alien creatures. And the dude Harrison, I don't know, if he ever comes in front of me, I would like to give him a piece of my mind. Like they he's dumb. Oh, he's dumb. Like that. Can you move on past that?
I love it. You're right about that, because he's like, and the thing came over and we were pals. It's like,
we are friends.
Hilarious.
We are friends. There you go.
Pals.
Yeah. So yeah, I think full points for being imaginative and maybe influencing a lot of other stories that came after it, and keeping in mind that it's a product of its time. I did not appreciate the non-serious tone of it at all.
Potty pooper. Yeah, I found it interesting that he that the whole story was written in italics, in quotes, basically, because he's telling the story to these other knuckleheads that he's with, and like it's basically a first person story, but only in the framework that he's telling these guys what's happening to him. And every once in a while we jump out, and those guys make a dumb comment or something like that. But I thought it was a neat, storytelling mechanic he used for the story itself. It was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in the context that these are all, what's the term I want to use? Just a bunch of non-serious guys hanging out. It's almost like they are sitting around in a bar and telling a story about something funny that happened to them, right? That's the tone, except something funny that happened to them was they met a bunch of really cool aliens. And the conclusion of one of the dudes about all of them is, oh, they're dumb. Okay.
Since we've been reading these stories together, I always tried to pay more attention to the first line because Jared's been mentioning that a lot, and I really love the first line. I think it's a great kind of first line, but kind of went downhill from there. But I think Varsha, I think you mentioned that it was a little, you couldn't jive with the story. I think it didn't really. I don't know if it was a dialogue or if it was the language or what, but I couldn't really find a rhythm with it. It felt a little clunky. I can't put my finger on why. I'm not smart enough to tell you. It just felt a little off.
It was a bit like, this is going to sound so bad. It's a bit like those stories you used to write when you were 6 or 7. You had an idea of narrative when you kind of go, and I walked around the corner and I seen this cool thing and I did this cool thing and then we left it behind and then I turned another corner and then I seen another cool thing and then there's no journey or thing to it. It was just like, and then we turned another corner and there was a monster there and then we turned a corner and there was a monster that pooped out sand pyramids and then there definitely is a sense of that being a sort of juvenile. It is entertaining without doubt, but it definitely had that structure, if you know what I mean. Of that kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And I agree with you. Our narrator kept complaining about how the excellently named Putz kept missing him and failing to rescue him.
Yep.
Like, dude, he has to look on an entire planet. Can you cut him some slack?
And then at the end, like an angel from the sky, it was Putz rescuing me.
Yep.
Oh, but
Made me
yeah,
laugh.
Yeah.
I liked it.
I think the alien, that the silica life form, I thought was extremely
was good.
imaginative. Yeah, that was pretty clever. So
That was clever. Did it maybe have? It kind of felt like it was trying to be funny, that it was trying to be a little playful and kind of whimsical, but
maybe that's what I needed to keep in mind. But I think so. I finished Embassytown and I immediately picked this up, which maybe was a mistake to do. So all the other not fast contact necessarily, but like learning the language of a different species stories that I've read have been extremely serious and like they go through this whole process and whatnot. And following on the heels of that, I think this felt off, but I guess I needed to readjust what to make of it before reading it, which I did not. Cool. So, anything else? And Jared would like to declare very much that we are rent. Ouch.
Yes.
Oh,
All right.
dear.
Yeah,
Then-
because some of the stories hurt a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. They do. We'll see. The next one is going to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, we've got this wart healing machine. It'll probably cure cancer. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
oh yeah,
That was a great ending.
Yeah.
So upbeat.
Oh, but yeah, we cured cancer. Look, we made friends with lots of different things. We didn't die to the dream monster, and we cured cancer. You know,
Yeah.
maybe there's
Well
more
done,
story here
yeah.
than I give it credit.
There's some hope.
Nice.
So next week we have
The last poet and the robots. I mean, that's a great name.
Yes, I agree. A merit.
Abraham Grace Merritt.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, we crossed the 100-page mark on this book, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
We are now on page 124.
There's just another 1,000 pages to go.
Only. Barely made a dent. Read 100 pages, barely made a dent. Wait till you start reading Malazan. Read 100 pages, no dent.
I still don't know what's going on. I love this. I love this book though. It's so neat. It's such a big, hefty book.
Yeah, I like it.
So much history in it.
Everybody thinks it's a science textbook in our house, though. It's really funny because if I leave it lying around, people are like, "Oh, there's a science textbook." It's not. It's not.
That's funny.
It has that size and heft to it.
That's funny. It is textbook size
Yeah,
though, which is interesting. Yeah.
It's like
So.
Giant.
Mm-hmm. It's big.
Big book of science fiction.
So we're going to be reading about spiders next week and robots and poets. That is an excellent combination of things to be reading about. So we'll see everybody in a week. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.